Hello everyone, George DeSantis here with the look at the market for the week ending July 26th, 2019. And as usual, we bring up a disclaimer, take a quick look at it, realize that this is not intended to be professional investment advice because I'm not a professional investment advisor. I do it for my own purposes and then I put it on YouTube, and those who care to look at it do so. So we'll review the general market for those who are new. We'll review the general market using the S&P 500 as a good marker for that. And then we look at some individual stocks. So let's begin with a weekly chart of the S&P 500. So here's a weekly chart of the S&P 500. We want to start, as we usually do, by looking at the positions of the relative positions of the moving averages to determine whether we seem to have an uptrend or downtrend here. So what we see here is the 4 exponential moving average. The yellow line is above the 9 exponential moving average, that red line, which is above the 30 weighted moving, front weighted moving average, which is the green line. And that is above the 50-day exponential moving average. Actually, it would be 50 week in this case, but 50 period anyway. So the moving averages are indicating a nice uptrend still. Now, the other thing to look at is the parabolic with these new parameters that I use. Parabolic switched to below the most recent bar here when we had this nice bullish engulfing candle, this body totally engulfing the previous bearish candle. And since then, it's been below the most recent bars. So that indicates to us, or it suggests to us, that we still have a nice uptrend going here, according to parabolic. Another thing I'd like to point out here is that it seems we had a nice little squeeze of the Bollinger Bands. And when you get a squeeze of the Bollinger Bands, we tend to come out of the squeeze one way or the other, either going up or down. In this case, we moved up in June, most of June, and in July too, we're moving up. So so the Bollinger Bands, this is the 2 standard deviation Bollinger Band, and so we see that we are riding that one up. Now, another thing we want to look at is I plotted the Fibonacci extensions from this low to this high, and you can see that the projection for the 1.618, or what we call the 618 golden rule projection, is about 3100, 3081 or so, or close to 3100. So we can expect, if all goes well, we continue to ride this band up, we're probably going to look at a high of about 3080 or so, 3083, and that's the case. But the one caveat we noticed last week, if you remember, last week we saw that we had, and for a couple of weeks now, we have this bearish divergence of MACD, because as we made a higher high here, MACD made a lower high than this high over here. So this is called a bearish divergence of MACD histogram. And those we don't want to ignore. So that's the one thing we have to keep an eye on. And it's something that might keep us up at night a little bit. But that's the only bearish thing here that I could see. Looking at RSI 12, for example, we are still above this 40%, this yellow line, 40% line. And as long as we're above that, we can safely say we're in an uptrend. And an indicator that I like so much, the Williams percentage, I use a 30 period on it. And you can see that since Williams crossed above the Williams percentile crossed above this magenta line, which is minus 50, it's maintained that position above the minus 50 line as this market trended up, even during this pullback here in May. So insofar as the weekly chart is concerned, a bullish uptrend, and we have to keep, the one caveat here is keep an eye on this this divergence, bearish divergence of MACD. So here's a daily chart of the S&P 500. Let's look at the moving averages. You can see that even though the 4 came just slightly below the 9 in this region here, just touching the 9, we are now trending up again because the 4 EMA this week trended above the 9 exponential moving average. And now we have this sort of morning star formation here, because we have a bullish candle, a bearish candle. This is also called a bullish harami, where the body of this candle on Thursday was totally engulfed by the previous candle on Wednesday. And then that was followed by Friday's good bullish candle here. We are pretty much coming up to the the 2 standard deviation line. So it may not be too surprising to see a little bit of a pullback on the daily chart here. But in any case, parabolic is still below the most recent bars. So on the daily chart, parabolic is also telling us uptrend. Now we saw on the weekly chart that we have this bearish divergence of MACD histogram. And when we look at the daily chart, we can see that the histogram seems to be tightening up, to be getting shorter. So this augurs well for the future. If we continue to do that, then we may override that bearish divergence of MACD on the weekly chart. Looking at some of the other indicators, you could see that RSI 12, since it crossed over here, at this point here, when we started an uptrend again in June, it remained up above the 40% line. And likewise, Williams per centaur crossed over around the same time to give us this new uptrend here. So on the daily chart, we're seeing the signs of a movement up again on the daily chart. So we might even be more encouraged by that it might finally override that bearish divergence that we saw of MACD histogram. Mostly bullish, folks. That's what I'm seeing. So let's take a look at some other charts from stock charts. So let's look at this new high, new low chart, as we usually do, the new high, new low index chart, I should say. And you can see here that we are staying in a bit of a trading range on the new high, new lows. But more recently, in the last couple of days, we've trended up. So we're staying above the break-even point here of 0, right? And that is bullish as well. Let's take a look at another chart. This chart is the chart that shows you Alex Elders, our friend Alex, paints the bars red, green, or blue. It's really a censoring system, of some of you know, because you've heard me say this, but for the new people at least, when the bar is red, you are not allowed to go long or be bullish. You shouldn't be bullish. When the bar is blue, you can go either long or short. You can buy the market or sell it. When the bar is green, you are not allowed to go short, because you can see what happens when the bar is green. Now, in this instance up here, where we are now, last week we had a blue bar. We were allowed to go either way, long or short. But now we have a green bar, sorry. We have a green bar which says we're not allowed to go short. So we should be bullish. We should be owning stocks. And as we look at this MACD chart here, part of the chart, you could see that bearish divergence. So it's something we have to be keeping an eye on, as I mentioned before. But you can see Williams per centaur nicely bullish. Okay, so that's another chart we'll want to look at. And look at this one. This is the percentage of the stocks in the S&P 100 above their 200-day moving average. And you can see that it's staying above that 50% line. And as long as it stays above that, we are having more bullish indications here than bearish indications. So generally, this market is looking still pretty bullish, except for the MACD histogram that looks bearish in divergence. So let's turn to some individual stocks. Some of them, again, I own. Some I owned. I no longer own them, but it's a list that I keep here. And then we'll look at some other lists. But let me quickly go through this list. I still own some of these. The first one I have here is Zoom Video Communications. It's an IPO, but I know that it's, I think they're making money. I mean, they have earnings, they're making money. One of the few IPOs, and I like how this looked. It doesn't meet the criteria for checklist, because it's too, it's too much of an IP, it's too much of a new stock on the list. But anyway, I bought some shares. The next one is Cadence Design. Um, Cadence Design, you could see it became oversold and it's ticked up now. You see it's ticking up from the oversold region here. Let's put up the checklist and see where it is. It's saying neutral because when the overbought oversold indicator is between these two dotted lines, 70 and 30, we get a neutral rating for the overbought oversold. When it's below the 30 line, we get an oversold, and when it's above the 70 line, we get an overbought. So that explains that. Let's turn to another one. I don't own this one, but it's also in a very similar situation. It was oversold and now it's gone up, but I don't own it. CMI, Cummins, I owned it for a while and then it became overbought. I sold it somewhere in here. Microsoft I still own. It has been somewhat oversold, or at least neutral, and it's ticking up again. But you can see most of these things are green, most of the 6 checkpoints. Synopsys, I am going to be buying it again. I owned it for a while, then it pulled back, became overbought, and this is one I have on my buy list. Adobe pulled back. Recently Adobe pulled back, but now it's getting into that oversold region. It's neutral still, but it's pretty close to being oversold. CMCSA, which is Comcast. Now this one I still own. It pulled back a bit, but the earnings came in fairly good, and we'll see where we go from here. iPay, it's an ETF, so you don't get a rating, you don't get an expert rating. And so, but I still own this one. You can see what happens. iPay was up 2% on Friday. It was up $1.03. That one I own quite a few shares. The SPY, let's take a look at that. You can see general market, SPY, the ETF for the general market. You can see it became oversold and now it's ticking up here. PayPal, it took a little bounce, it took a little beating here for a few days ago. I think it was Thursday, but on Friday it came right back, and now it's becoming oversold again. So I'm holding it. MasterCard, of course, we still hold it, and Visa, same thing. And there's another new stock that I bought, and that is Zscaler, and you can see it went up nicely on Friday. And I like it. It's in the security business in software. Now, last week I mentioned that Shaken add this feature, this checklist feature, and it basically is a nice summary of the stock or ETF. Actually, ETFs are not. They don't give you a checklist for the ETFs, but for any stock, it gives you a real nice checklist. Now, what I did was I did that for a number of indications and then for a number of lists. And then I took all of those that meet all these green, I call them the green criteria. And this is a list here. You can stop this video and take a note if you wish, or you could replay it. And these are all the ones that are meeting the criteria. Now, I'm not familiar with some of these at all. But you can see that they are all in the green because they became oversold and they meet all the other criteria here. So I would check these out, I'm not saying to run out and buy them without checking them out further, but let me bring up the rest of them. You see there are quite a few here that meet these criteria. Now we're running out of time, but I just wanted to introduce you to that. I will look at it myself. What I'm going to do is put this list on a watch list on Fidelity, pretend I bought 100 shares of each and follow them and see how they perform. So I hope you have a good weekend, and we'll do this again next week, God willing.